The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, CHD. I'm Mack Rosenberg, General Counsel of Children's Health Defense, and I'm very excited to be with you this morning, here with you this morning. We have two great guests, Yolanda Huang, who is a mother, an advocate, an activist, and a lawyer, and she's going to talk to us about helping kids grow, and we're going to be talking about gardening and sunshine and tactile learning. And Camilla Rees is then going to join me to talk about radiation-free schools and the dangers of radiation and cell towers and electromagnetic fields. So it's going to be a very exciting show. We're really going to talk about ways. I think these two guests are going to provide some really integral learning for us in the very complementary areas that we'll be discussing to make our kids healthy and make ourselves healthy too. But first, we have some news. So on CHD TV, you can follow along and listen to the trial of concerning Grace Shara's death. She died in hospital during COVID. She went into hospital relatively healthy, and she passed away there. It's a wrongful death trial taking place in Wisconsin now. And as I said, we're covering it on CHD TV. There's a stream from the courtroom, and you can get the latest news on that. We're also covering it in the Defender. And I'm sure you all have heard that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the Secretary of Health and Human Services, this week removed all members of the Centers for Disease Control's Vaccine Advisory Committee, ACIP. They have all been removed. He is going to be repopulating that committee with new appointees because he sees that there's a real lack of trust in the science that's coming out regarding vaccines, what these committees are looking at, what FDA and ACIP are approving and recommending for our children and for adults. Secretary Kennedy tweeted out just last night, yesterday, I retired 17 members of the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP, the CDC external panel that wields the grave responsibility of adding new vaccines to the recommended childhood schedule. Over the coming days, I'll use this platform to announce new members to populate ACIP. None of these individuals will be ideological anti-vaxxers. They'll be highly credentialed physicians and scientists who will make extremely consequential public health determinations by applying evidence-based decision-making with objectivity and common sense. He went on in this tweet, and these are just parts of the tweet. It's a very long tweet. You can find this on Twitter from last night and read it all yourself. I will also be tweeting examples of the historical corruption at ACIP to help the public understand why this clean sweep was necessary. The most outrageous example of ACIP's malevolent malpractice has been its stubborn unwillingness to demand adequate safety trials before recommending new vaccines for our children. Today, a compliant American child receives between 69 and 92 routine vaccines, depending on brand and dictated dosage, from conception to 18 years of age. This is up from 11 shots in 1986. ACIP has recommended each of these additional jabs without requiring placebo-controlled trials for any of them. This means that no one can scientifically ascertain whether these products are averting more problems than they are causing. It is time to stop playing games, such as CNN's false gotcha. We have gone from 3 routine injections by age 1 in 1986, the year the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act passed, to 25 routine injections by age 1 in 2025, which now does not include the COVID-19 vaccine. Because of the 1986 Act, every one of these products, save one, was developed by companies knowing that they would almost never be liable for serious harm. During the same period, chronic disease in our children exploded, most of which are caused by immune system dysregulation. if we are to identify the exposures that are causing this epidemic of autoimmune disease, we need to rule out products given dozens of times to young children, specifically to modify the immune system, as potential culprits. Our infants and children deserve the best safety trials possible to keep them safe. We should care as much about every child who could be injured by one of these products as we do every child who could be injured by an infectious disease. We must protect all children. So the Secretary is sending a powerful message by dismantling ACIP and now bringing together new members for that committee. He has talked about many times in the past how the ACIP members the committee is rife with conflicts of interest. And we're hoping that this newly assembled committee addresses those serious questions and really is looking out for children's safety. And now on to a Texas proposed bill, not fit for human consumption. Texas could require warning labels on popular snack foods. Texas is one of the states that's leading the way with protective measures for children, families, and individuals in a variety of areas. And that segues very nicely to our first guest, Yolanda Huang, who's here to talk about growing healthy children. She is the mother of 2 grown sons, and she is an advocate and a lawyer. And when her sons were children, she became involved in school lunch programs, working to improve the food in the Berkeley, California public school system. She started a gardening and cooking program in all 10 elementary schools in Berkeley and in 2 of the 3 middle schools. Students grow and harvest the food and cook as part of the program. 30 years later, this program is hugely popular and financially supported by a soda tax passed by the voters of the city of Berkeley. Welcome, Yolanda. I'm happy to have you here today.
Thank you for having me.
So, food is so important to all of us, and eating healthy food is really just fundamental to having good health. But is it true? We often hear this. Parents will say it, my child is a picky eater. I can't get them to eat X, Y, and Z. They won't eat vegetables. Is it true that children don't like vegetables?
I think that children are inherently curious and like to investigate their world. And if you present vegetables in ways that are interesting and that they can play with and explore, of course they're going to be interested. And most children don't have a concept of how food grows. They don't have an opportunity to watch the food grow. And they're often astonished when you pull food out of dirt. They're always taught, oh, be clean, don't wash your hands. We don't want our kids to be clean. And then they don't get to play in the dirt. And so when you see a child pull a carrot out of the dirt and it's dewy and it's orange and it's got all that dirt on it, so they're so excited. They just want to bite it before they even have a chance to rinse it. I have seen, there are kids that I worked with who didn't know where potatoes came from. They thought potatoes grew on trees like apples because they're got the shape of an apple. They're red, they're round. And they didn't have any idea how to grow a potato. And when you harvest the potatoes, and the new potatoes are really, they're beautiful and they're juicy, you see kids, they just want to take a bite because they've never experienced it. So I think that part of growing food is showing them their connection to how the food comes, and that the food is really delicious when it's fresh and new. And I think that's where kids don't have that experience, and therefore they don't like vegetables because what's presented to them is not palatable.
So tell us more about how you came to start this program.
It was serendipitous. I had decided to take a few years off because my children were young and I wanted to be home with them. My son at that time was not quite 5, and my younger son was almost 3. And we had a 13-year-old babysitter who lived at the middle school, and he would walk by my house on his way home, and he would often stop to play with my boys. And so one day he said to me, he says, I hate my school. It's so ugly. I wish we had a garden, and I always have been a gardener. He says, why don't you come and plant a garden at my school? And so, it was sort of like, okay, I'm retired. I'm not retired. I'm not working. And so I went with the boys, and it was a very drab, brick, hardscape school. So I thought, oh, I'll put a little few flowers in. And so it grew from there. The kids loved the flower garden. After a year of doing the flower garden, one of them said, let's grow vegetables. And so we decided to grow vegetables. And it got so popular that the next idea was, well, we should just rip out the volleyball courts, which were asphalt, and turn that into a garden, which we did. And so it grew in terms of the kids' enthusiasm for it. And at that point, parents joined. And there were a lot of parents who felt like, they wanted their children to be able to share the school lunch with the other children. They had allergies, or parents were concerned because all of the food at that time was prep, chill, and reheat. So by the time it came to you, it had been enclosed in plastic, it had been cooked 3 days before, or it was pre-cooked, packaged foods, and they didn't want their kids to eat this. So I was feeding my kids organic because I felt like I didn't want to put anything in my children that had pesticides or preservatives or coloring in them. And so we organized and got a school policy that the board finally adopted, that all children are entitled to organic foods. We want the best for all our children, and that the school should model the kinds of foods that children get. And so it was a long process. It was not easy. I think it took 8 years before we got to that point, because they had the same prejudice that children will not eat vegetables. They'll just throw it away. It'll be a waste of money. And we started by having salad bars where the children grew the salad, they washed the salad, and then we supplemented it with fresh salad that we bought from the store. And so it was salad, a fruit, and then maybe, a roll of some sort that they had for their lunch. And they loved it. And then on Fridays, the mothers came and we made a vegetable soup to go with it. So it was soup and salad day on Fridays. And that was the genesis, that kids who grow and cook their food love it and they eat it. And I think that's where they develop their palate. I happen sometimes to walk around and I'm eating lunch at a salad bar, and I'll have a 30-year-old come who I don't recognize anymore because they're like 3 times the size of when they were 10. And they'll say hi to me, and they're eating a salad, and they'll say, well, my salad eating days came from working in the garden.
That's really, it's so inspirational, because I think, as you said, there's, for many, many children, especially I think in the United States, there's such a disconnect between where their food comes from and the food that they see, whether they see it in a grocery store or it's just something a parent puts on the table in front of them and says, here, eat your broccoli or eat your asparagus, versus growing it or pulling that carrot out of the ground. And can you talk as well about some of the other, this isn't just about learning how to garden, learning how to grow your food and seeing where it comes from. This program really facilitates learning for these children in many, many different ways. Can you talk about that?
Well, in order to get into the schools, we had to justify it in terms of the school curriculum. And I tried to develop curriculum. There's a lot of effort at that time to develop garden-based curriculum for elementary and middle school. And so we connected it to both the science, and we connected it definitely to the math program, and some to the history and language. But I'm a strong believer that children learn through tactile experiences. And so we would try and teach them math by having them actually interact with the garden. So one of the things we did once was we had a huge worm pile, and we wanted them to estimate how many worms were in the pile. How would you find out how many worms were in this pile? And so they had to go through and pull out the worms. And they finally figured, and it was all like, you do this and then come back and report how well it works. So we broke them out to little teams. They sat there and they played with the worms. They had cups where they counted like the worms in a cup. And then they tried to calculate how much material was in the entire pile. And then they had to all add up their material, their numbers together. And then at the very end, it actually took several days. We taught them the formula for calculating volume. But that was a lesson where by playing with the material, they actually were able with their hands to understand what calculating volume means, or doing an estimate. If you have like 5 worms in a cup and you have 100 cups, can you estimate that there are 500 worms in this pile? So it's that kind of tactile learning which makes the math much more concrete. And I think that children, especially boys, really need to be out there moving rather than sitting on their rear end. And I think one of the reasons why boys fall behind in school is they don't learn by being inactive and being talked to. They learn by getting into something and moving with their whole bodies and exploring it and really developing that lesson. So I think that for me, as the mother of boys, that was the way I thought I was helping children learn basics by interacting with the physical world.
I think that's so true. I'm a boy mom too. So I have seen how that tactile learning has helped my son as well. And kids don't move enough in school as a general rule now. As you said, they sit there and they're talked to, or they're watching a video of something, or they're doing just a worksheet, something like that. And a lot of times those aren't even done by hand anymore, right? So you don't have that connection. We talked about this earlier before we went on, the importance of writing things, because there's a connection between writing and your brain remembering information and retaining that information. And kids are now on Chromebooks and things like that all day in the classroom. So they're not even using their hands to do writing. I mean, kids, from what I understand, my son's a little bit older now, but kids don't even really learn cursive writing in school anymore. All those skills are falling by the wayside.
I think that's really essential, because I think the development of our tactile hand really helps develop the brain. And you see it in the way kids use gross motor. Like if you take a wheelbarrow and you give it to them and they have to push a heavy load, they really learn physics, right? They really learn physics. They have to figure out how to balance it. They have to learn how much they can put in. And boys and girls learn differently. Boys learn from making mistakes, and you see it over and over. You give them a wheelbarrow, they overload it, they push it 3 feet and they dump the load. And then do it again until they figure out how to get a load that they can push. And that's how they learn. If you just talk to them about not taking risks or being careful or don't dump the load, they don't learn until they try to push an overloaded wheelbarrow and dumped it. And I think that that's what boys need. They need the opportunity to make mistakes, to see what their limits are, and then figure out where the balance is. And then that really works. And I think that that's an important aspect. And then you can bring it to the math lesson. What was the weight of the load? How do we figure it out? What could you push? Why was it so forth? Is it easier with a smaller wheelbarrow? And then they can do the theoretical stuff. But until they've pushed it and dumped it, they won't figure it out. And I totally agree. I think having kids immobile and in front of a screen is a bad idea. And by having them outside, they're getting sunshine, they're getting physical exercise, and so many public schools are reducing PE and reducing outside recreation time for kids. So this was a way in which I could shoehorn all of those things that I think are good for kids, movement, sunshine, into a program that I could ostensibly call academic.
And what kind of feedback have you gotten over the years from both teachers, school administrators, and the parents in the community?
I think parents love it. The program is definitely very solid. It's, every school is responsible for their own program. But the fact that Berkeley voted as a city to fund this by putting on a soda tax, and the soda tax went on for 10 years and they just renewed it. And by doing that, they're saying this is important for our children. And we want to fund it, we want to support it, and we want every child to have the experience at least 1 year of working in the garden. And in the elementary schools, they get to work in the garden all the years. I think that it's essential.
I think that's really amazing. And I have family and friends who have benefited from your program who live in Berkeley. So my college roommate is raising her children there. I have a niece who lives in Berkeley. So it's been really, I know of the program and I know just how impactful it is. You had mentioned how important it is to be out in the sunshine. You are also a civil rights lawyer, and I understand that you won a very important and groundbreaking decision with respect to inmates' rights to sunshine. Can you talk about that?
Well, intuitively, we know that being in the sun feels good. And we want to be in the sun. Everybody likes to be in the sun. But the science of the impact of sun on skin is it's new. It's probably 25 years old. And in San Francisco County Jail, they built these jails so that no one ever gets to be in the sun. You could be in jail for 2.5, 3 years and never have sun on your skin. So is it just because we're coddling them and we want them to feel good, or is there science behind it? And we were able to bring in a world-class expert, Dr. Charles Czeisler, who's a professor, a medical doctor and professor at Harvard, who was able to show us that the studies show that human physiology needs sunlight on your skin. If you don't get sunlight on your skin, you have the possibility of developing serious physiological illnesses like neurological. Your brain just doesn't work as well. For older people, you could actually develop some form of dementia or memory loss. Minimally, you get depressed, high blood pressure, digestive problems. They're all related. They don't know the causeway which that happened, but they've been able to demonstrate it. So I think that what it shows is that sunlight is not just feel good. It's not just I feel better in the sun, but I feel better in the sun because I actually am physically receiving benefit from it. And what I heard from Dr. Czeisler is if you have an emotion, like I feel this way, we may not know the biochemistry pathway for it, but there is a biochemical pathway, and science is just behind. So if you get depressed because you're not in the sun, there's a reason for it. They just don't know why. It's not just, I feel better, but you feel better because the sunlight is having an interaction with your skin that benefits you. And so we were able to show that if you deprive sunlight, total sunlight to inmates, and the judge held that it's a violation of our constitutional rights. It's unnecessary and unreasonable punishment to deprive people of sunlight because we need it. It causes health benefits to have sunlight.
That's amazing. And as we said earlier, one of the huge benefits of the gardening program in Berkeley is that kids are out in the sunlight. And kids don't get, as much sunlight now as they used to. I mean, when I was a child, especially in the summer, I probably left my house at 8 o'clock in the morning and maybe came home for dinner if I wasn't having dinner at a friend's house. And I was running around outside playing and swimming all day long. And you don't see kids doing that so much anymore. And they aren't getting that vitamin D from the sun. And when they are outside, they're often slathered in sunscreen. So their bodies aren't absorbing the benefits of the sun. And I am sure that the impact on inmates of being able to spend time in the sun is tremendous.
I want to add one thing for your listeners, and that is taking vitamin D does not substitute for being in the sun. So you can't deprive yourself of sunlight and take vitamin D. It doesn't have the same effect.
Thank you. And thank you very much for being with us today. This was a really wonderful interview, and I'm hoping that schools around the country pick up the mantle that you of starting this program and start programs in their own schools and spread this incredible learning opportunity to children around the country. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And now I'd like to bring on Camilla Rees. Camilla Rees is an advocate in the electromagnetic radiation, electromagnetic field area. But Camilla, you started on Wall Street. Can you tell us a little bit about your trajectory
Sure.
to where
Yeah,
you are today?
I was in a very traditional career working in investment banking, and I ended up actually long before I knew about the EMF issue, I got sick and turned out that I had lupus. They said turned out to be a dental infection, but it took me 10 years of studying medicine, health, going around, sitting in medical conferences, learning everything I could to get myself well. And I finally did and found out it was a wisdom tooth infection. And then I was ready to resume my career, and I got dizzy, and I was living in San Francisco in an apartment, and I was dizzy, and I couldn't open my mail, and I got heart irregularities when I was lying on my bed. One time I completely collapsed to the floor, had to crawl to the phone to get help. And it turned out that a new neighbor had moved in next door and put a wireless router on the other side of the wall from my pillow. So after a couple of weeks and about 2 months total of exposures to my brain through a thin wall, I was really debilitated, and I had to get to the bottom of it. And I got to the bottom of it as I knew what it wasn't. And I learned about the wireless technologies in one of the medical conferences I had attended. And I thought, I wonder if it could be that. And somebody from LA came up and brought me a meter, and we figured it out. It was it's on the other side of the wall. And it took me a long, long time to recover. And in fact, speaking of sunshine, sunshine was a key part of my recovery, because there was no doctor back then that knew anything about this subject. And I had to rely on my instincts, and my instincts were to get exercise, to get the communication systems in the body working better, to get sunshine, all these artificial EMFs are, they're just artificial, man-made, whereas the sunshine is a full spectrum. And my instincts told me I needed that. And then my instincts told me I needed to do a living foods diet. So I did raw food for, oh gosh, maybe 8 or 9 months. And finally, I got myself well. So I learned through experience. I learned as a result of this process how to measure the electromagnetic fields. And so began my journey. I thought it was going to take a year to help the scientists to explain what they knew, that I was learning, that there was all this science going back decades. And I thought, well, it would just take a year of me to help them communicate what they know. And little did I know, it's now been 17 years. And, I didn't originally intend to become an activist. I had never been an activist, but ethically, I had no choice but to continue to share education about this issue and try to be a catalyst for change.
Well, thank you for taking that trajectory and getting on that path. And your sharing your story just shows, talking about your raw foods diet and talking about being outside in the sunshine and getting exercise, the synergy between what we're talking about and what I just spoke to Yolanda about really is tremendous. And I think that, you mentioned that this wireless router was put on the other side of the wall from your bedroom. So many people who are having smart meters installed on their homes, whether they feel they have no choice or they want them because they think it's a good technology, and we're trying to educate people, here at CHD about issues with smart meters all the time. But so many people, and I don't know why, they seem to often be plunked on the bedroom, on the exterior wall near a bedroom, but they do seem to be installed there frequently. And people notice disruptions in their sleep or disruptions in their child's sleep. And
Absolutely.
Especially at the times of, and I've learned this from Scott McCullough, right? At the times of night that data is downloaded to the utility provider, and people, that will wake, it's such a surge, it wakes people up. And people even notice differences in their pets. A lot of people are learning that it's important to turn off if you're using Wi-Fi in your home, to turn off that Wi-Fi at night. It can improve your quality of sleep. If you cannot get a smart meter installed, my meter outside my house has a big tag on it that says no smart meter, and I pay a little bit every month for the privilege of not having that. But I touched with Yolanda briefly about how kids learn nowadays, and being attached to a Chromebook all the time, and exposure to electromagnetic fields, electromagnetic radiation in schools has been heightened over the past several years. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, schools and really anywhere that children exist, really should minimize these exposures. Right now, we're seeing not only high-powered routers in the school and then communicating with wireless Chromebooks and laptops, but we're seeing actually cell towers going up on the school property or near the school, beaming this radiation into their environment. And so all of these exposures, they're all biologically disruptive. They are that think of this radiation, it's like an energy force, and it causes chaos in the regulation systems that are meant to be working harmoniously. And so with children in particular, we've put on many programs, three programs, I think, on the effects to children and their special vulnerability, where, children have they absorb 2 times the radiation in their brain, they 3 times to the hippocampus and hypothalamus. Their eyes are way more vulnerable to taking in the radiation. And the exposure guidelines, which are totally inadequate in the first place, were never designed to protect children. And so there was one case in Massachusetts where child wore a dosimeter put it in his pocket and wore it into school because he'd been having problems in a lot of the classrooms. And his mother was like a detective trying to figure out, had him keeping a log of his symptoms, trying to figure out if it was something in a particular classroom. So he wore a dosimeter eventually and kept doing his log. And it turned out that all the symptoms he was having, not being able to concentrate, irritable, whatever, they all happened in the places with the highest EMF, radio frequency radiation exposures. There was one school that I heard about that there was a cell tower right outside the school, and it was actually, the building biology guidelines are anything over 1,000 microwatts per meter squared is considered extreme concern. So it was one school that had over 2 million microwatts per meter squared, just outside the school. So somewhere less of that, indoors. But just outrageous things are happening right now. There's a cancer cluster in teachers in a school in Kansas that's being investigated. So this is just so ill-advised. Unfortunately, the school districts seem to really like allowing cell towers on the premises because they get paid, just like any real estate owner gets paid from putting antennas on top of their building. So there's, real conflict of interest there, and children are really not being protected. And, there are acute effects, like the boy in Massachusetts I mentioned, immediate effects in a classroom. And then we have to remember that there are chronic effects and there are cumulative effects and additive from additive exposures and long-term exposures. And, there's definitely evidence that the closer you are to a cell tower, much higher risk of cancer, much higher risk of headaches and insomnia, and it depletes melatonin, and that's why people get insomnia. Much higher risk of all kinds of problems. There's research. 20 years ago, there was 2 studies out of Germany that showed. The first one showed much higher incidence of cancer initiation in if you were within 400 meters of a cell tower. And then another study showed that that men and women had 300% increase risk of cancer after a certain number of years. This is just insane, because it's not that our government hasn't known about this. We the U.S. Navy, we did a paper on that recently featuring that. The many other ends of the U.S. government, NASA, EPA, Defense Intelligence Agency, U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, NIH with the Department of Energy did a study showing blood glucose changes in the brain. NIH, the National Toxicology Program study, large animal study, showed increased risk of cancer. And in that case, that what was interesting, it was not featured in the press, is it was a study on animals and rats. And what they didn't talk about, but that was in the study and the data, is that there were biological changes in those rats in all 13 biological systems. There were 920 different effects on the rat body, like neoplasms and non-neoplastic lesions, that show that our whole body is being affected by this radiation. It's not natural, and we shouldn't have it in our schools or in our homes or in our offices. And just because somebody doesn't feel the effects doesn't mean that their biology isn't responding. And we know from looking at live blood under a microscope, we see the blood clumping together that puts you at great risk for strokes. We know from thermography that putting a cell phone near the head is increasing the temperature as much as almost 4 degrees. Actually, that's a thermal effect that should be covered by the guidelines. We know from QEEG tests on the brain that within 2 minutes of using a cell phone on a healthy college student, tremendous changes in the brain. And I could go on and on, but so people shouldn't think that just because they're okay, that they're not being affected. They are, and those effects will add up and eventually potentially create a serious condition.
It really is. I think you're right. Some people just say, well, maybe there are people who are very sensitive to this, and those are the people who are getting the headaches and the insomnia and other things. But the chronic effects that people may not be attributing to these exposures are really, really concerning. And I think this is, just looking as you were speaking, we were showing also some scans up on the screen that really are just a graphic depiction of how exposure to this radiation, you're holding a cell phone up to your ear, which, I don't do, but a lot of people do. And the choice that people make instead of holding their phone up to their ear is maybe using something like wireless ear pods, which also carry their own risks, right?
Right into your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I have a wired headset. The wired headset goes with my phone. It goes with me everywhere. And just, getting young people today, especially, but not just young people, carrying their phones in their pockets. And, their phone is always attached to their body, not just even nearby or on a table. A little ways away. I'm personally the person who's guilty of the opposite of that. I take my phone and I put it down somewhere and then forget where I left it in my house and have to go hunting for it, or have someone call me if someone's at home with me. But this combined with the way kids are taught now, we talked about kids just sitting there in front of a computer learning, even putting aside those exposures, the methodology and the lack of movement and the lack of tactile learning that kids experience now, and then compounding that with the dangerous exposures to radiation is really concerning for what are, the current generation and kids who are a little bit older than current school age kids and the kids coming up, how this is going to impact their health and their functionality going forward.
Well, there's a real problem, as you know, with tech addiction. And what people don't understand is that the electromagnetic fields, if you're using a wireless computer, are actually contributing to that addiction because it's raising the endorphins. So there really needs to be better understanding of that. So there are all kinds of things that we've been educating for a long, long time about the ways that people can live more safely and minimize their exposures. But I think the biggest issue here is the involuntary exposures that we don't have any control over from the cell towers and antennas in our environment. You know, who was it? Ronald Kostoff in his paper, he's from Georgia Tech, in his paper, it's called The Largest Unethical Medical Experiment Ever, says that, you know, all this exposure that we're getting involuntarily violates one of the most important ethical principles in science, which is, you know, people need to have informed consent. So, you know, that's why, I mean, the two core issues really that are driving the continued proliferation of this infrastructure. I mean, it's not just going to be what it is today, tomorrow. These antennas are going up everywhere, and the two core issues that are enabling it are the inadequate exposure guidelines that basically provides cover for all the providers and installers and real estate owners and everybody else involved in putting up this infrastructure, and the Section 704 of the Telecom Act of 1996, which took away local governments' rights to influence the siting of cell towers on health or environmental grounds. That was egregious. And it's made it very, very difficult for communities to fight these towers or to influence the placement of the infrastructure on health or environmental grounds. It's almost impossible. And so I'm really proud of Children's Health Defense for taking the lead and initiating an effort called 704 No More. And I'm helping that effort, and we're trying to unify the field because this, in addition to the exposure guideline issue, these are the core issues. There's plenty of education out there and what people can do, and we can do programs on that. We've been doing programs on that for a long time, but we need to focus on the legal issues right now, the legal legislative possibilities here to create a healthier environment. And we were very disappointed to see the EMF issue, this issue not be included in the recent MAHA report, which is supposed to identify the likely drivers of the chronic illness problem. And this deserves to be right up there on that list. It's like the elephant in the room. If we don't address the biological stressor that's creating dysregulation in all systems, you know, and creating neurological problems, it's linked to 10 cancers now, endocrine problems, you know, sleep problems, all kinds of everything, you know, if we don't address it, we're just doomed, I think. This is my last stand, trying to address these legal issues that we're hoping people will get behind, because it's not going to happen on its own. The US government has known about these risks since, you know, at least 1971, when the US Navy report came out by Zori Glazer. And it turns out that 23 of today's fastest growing chronic diseases were identified in that Navy report in 1971, over half a century ago. And so the US government's known, they haven't done anything. Congress is very conflicted right now. There are at least there are about 60 bills in Congress that are looking to expand wireless infrastructure and further take away local governments' rights. You know, that we need to be looking at, well, you know, how much funding are they getting from the telecom industry? And, you know, this whole idea of corporate capture of telecom that Harvard University's Safra Center for Ethics wrote about. You know, how you know, we need to be addressing this issue, because they're not doing right by us, the members of Congress. They need to be educated. For those who don't understand it, they need to be educated. I'm sure many do understand it and are still, you know, promoting these bills.
Well, and I agree with you. I think 704 No More is an extremely important initiative, and I'm proud of CHD for playing an important role in this. but it's also a collective of many organizations who are coming together to support this effort. And your advocacy and the advocacy of others is also really fundamental to this succeeding. And we have another initiative at CHD that's called Stop 5G. And it's a way for communities to learn how they can possibly make an impact in their local community to make powerful change. And we are always legally looking for creative ways to give communities a voice and give citizens a voice in trying to stop some of these exposures, because there are many communities who don't want this happening to them. And as you said, there's no informed consent for people in these circumstances in many cases when cell towers go up. I know personally, my son went to school up in New England. I live in New Jersey. And when I would drive up to Vermont, I would drive through, rural Massachusetts, Western Massachusetts, beautiful drive. And for a long time in, his first couple of years of college, there really weren't cell towers around. And I would be on a call and the call would drop, or I'd say, oh gosh, it's, what a blessing that I'm driving for a couple of hours where no one can actually reach me. And then all of a sudden, I noticed my signal getting better and lasting longer. And then I saw the towers all along the highway. And it is just, all for the sake of connectivity. And it's not, we could probably spend a long time talking about whether those are real connections that people are even making, right? They're not connections face to face and in person, and that's a whole separate issue. Are there any other things that you'd like to share with people that they can do to maybe help develop solutions in their own communities?
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important. It's wonderful that CHD is bringing together all these many groups. I think there are over 100 groups now supporting 704 No More. And there are committees that people can get involved with, and legislative and grassroots. That grassroots activation is a key part of the plan. And so I'd encourage people to get involved. There are ways to learn. You can, about how you can protect yourself. I have a website, Manhattan Neighbors, for safer telecommunications. There are many other good websites out there, Children's Health Defense content, Environmental Health Trust. There are many places people can learn. But my point is that the most important thing is that people become engaged in this, what's left of our democracy, and get involved and putting pressure from the bottom up, educating from the bottom up. It's people have to come together and get louder in order for us to be successful to change what's happened to our world. It's a tragedy, really, what's happened to our environment. Like you said, you see the towers on the highway, on the on-ramp, on the off-ramp, in the homes, in the towns, in the commercial districts, everywhere you go, that you keep seeing more and more of these towers, and they keep going up. And then the small cell antennas that are going on utility poles, on and street lamps right outside homes, beaming into second floor windows. And in New York City, they're actually putting big, huge jumbo 32-foot towers on the sidewalks. So it's not going to stop until people start getting involved, get engaged, find a local group that's working on this issue, support the national efforts to address the legal issues. That's really what is needed now, and we need to come together to succeed.
Thank you. I 100% agree. People need to get involved. Camilla, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing all this important information. We really appreciate you, and it was great to have this time to speak with you. And now we are going to move to a people studies story.
All right, everyone, now we're going to go over to Stephanie. Good morning, Stephanie. Stephanie has a story for us, a personal story. Thank you, Stephanie, for being brave and for being here and telling us about your story. Good morning.
Thank you, Polly. Thanks for having me on. I'm honored to be here.
Well, thank you for waiting patiently for the whole show, being at the end. Right, Stephanie, let's start off your story because this starts off with HPV Gardasil shot, correct?
It does, yes.
So before we talk about that, can we just go back and talk about where was your mindset with vaccinations? Were you completely up to date with everything? We'd always been vaccinated?
So I've always been vaccinated. I'm completely up to date from all of the childhood shots. My parents were very pro-vaccine and have actually changed their tune as I have become a mother. And I went to go get all of my updated shots for my junior and high school year, and the effects were subtle, and I didn't even tie them back to the vaccine until I was an adult and experienced another vaccine reaction.
Okay, so let's talk about, you took the HPV, was it just the HPV Gardasil when you went to catch up on your shots?
So the first time I got the first HPV round, I also got the Tdap or the TD.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It was probably the Tdap because I presume you were an adult then.
Yes, I believe I was 17.
Oh no, maybe it might have been the DTaP. But anyway, so you took that and you took an HPV.
Yes.
Wow.
And I didn't even realize how much it affected me until I went back and I looked at the dates, and I really remembered about my junior and senior year in high school and what happened to me. I had started off being a volleyball player on my varsity team. I was a little libero, and I started playing so well. I was put in before seniors that were supposed to be starters, and I was starting, and I got that shot, and my physicality, I couldn't focus. I could not play, and I ended up getting replaced because I couldn't do it anymore. And I thought it was because of my mental load and anxiety and depression. And I go back and I look, and right as I had gotten that shot was in the middle of my playing season where I had faltered.
Did you take 3 Gardasil shots in all?
I did not. I only took the second one. And after the second one, I started getting these partial subluxations in my chest. My ribs would pop out. And the first time it happened, I thought I was having a heart attack. It was in the middle of Spanish class, and I was supposed to be taking a test, and I had reached down to grab a notebook, and my bone had popped out. And I had to go to the office and call my mom, and I thought I was dying. And after that, it resolved, but it never went away. I always had these partial subluxations happening to my body. And I started getting these massive tension headaches where I could not focus or do anything. And I was just told, oh, it's part of life. It's normal. It's part of hormones and all of the things. And I just had to learn to live with it.
Now, Stephanie, you went on to go to nursing school, correct? And
I did.
they required you to have the flu and Tdap, correct?
Yes. So I had to get my shots up to date, and I had had some experiences previous to that where my symptoms had worsened. I had started on an antidepressant, and it had started causing neurological issues in my shoulder and down my right arm. And then I went and I got these updated vaccines, and my symptoms spread not just from my arm, but to my leg. And I started getting neurologic conditions and shooting pains on the left side of my body as well. And I felt like my whole body was on fire. I went to the doctor, and it was right after the vaccines were given, and they diagnosed me with a mild Guillain-Barré syndrome. So not the condition that's life-threatening and reaches your lungs, but the condition that affects your nerves so severely you're in severe pain, and you start to like get paralysis of feeling and of touch and sensation.
Did you at this point now realize this is the vaccines?
Yes, this was a turning point for me. It happened a year and a half before COVID. So I was awake when COVID happened. And COVID was a catalyst for me not to become awake, but to do more of a deep dive and really open my eyes to all of the vaccines. And I started to heal and find things. I took control back of my life, and I stepped away from the pharmaceutical industry, even though I had more injuries. After this vaccine, Gatavist and MRI contrast, it was given to me trying to figure out what was going on with me. And it caused the symptoms in my body to spread and happen all at once. And my blood pressure dropped, and I was shaky and white and pale. And they wanted me to go to the ER, and I chose not to and to wait it out. But it was a huge couple steps forward, 10 steps back. And after that, I really turned away from the pharmaceutical industry, and I started looking for things that would help me, because I was awake completely and I knew that vaccines and pharmaceuticals were doing damage to my body.
So is there anything that would ever make you take a vaccine again?
No, never. I know now that recovering naturally from these diseases by not being malnourished, by having the foods we need and the supplementation we need, by growing food in my own garden, by fermenting my own apple cider vinegar, by taking the things that my body needs and that Heavenly Father leads me to, that I am strong and capable of overcoming any disease.
And have you seen the health of the unvaccinated? Have you experienced that?
Yes, I have a son now, and I was so sick at one point, I was bedridden to the point where I was going to have to drop out of nursing school because I couldn't do a 12-hour clinical shift. I would do one clinical shift and then lay in bed the entire week, just getting ready for my next 12-hour clinical shift. And I, going to the hospital and working in the medical industry, have seen how sick and how ill we are. Being a mother, I've seen how many ear infections, I've seen autism, I've seen kids on the spectrum in my family and all around me with chronic sensory issues and always being sick. And it kills me, it hurts me so badly, because I see my son and he is thriving. And I see those around me who choose not to vaccinate and their kids are thriving. And that doesn't mean that my son doesn't get sick and he doesn't have his medical issues. He was actually injured by an antibiotic. But I know that vaccines are not the answer. And in fact, some of the ingredients in them, especially the DNA from aborted fetal cells, I know that they play a key role in what we see going on in the world today, and that they are harming us at a very severe level.
Now, you mentioned your parents were very pro-vaccine. So what do they think about your story and your beautiful toxin-free son, their grandchild? What is going through their minds now?
So it's been very eye-opening as I've shared my story with them. And I have some complicated paternal relationships, but I have two moms, and my biological mom is actually a nurse and a nurse practitioner. So as I've shared this information with her and her eyes have been opened through COVID, it's completely changed her trajectory on the issue. And she is now very anti-vaccine. My adopted mom, she is the one that took me to get my Gardasil shot. And yet I'm here being congratulated for not vaccinating my son and for opening my eyes and learning, where she wishes she had known more and not had us vaccinated.
How old is your son?
He is 18 months now.
And is he developing typically?
So he is very, very healthy, except for an injury to his gut microbiome that was caused by an antibiotic. It has caused him to struggle with gaining calcium in his body, and has led to a mild form of rickets. And so he's so advanced. He is so big for his age. And as we're treating the rickets with high bioavailable doses of calcium and vitamin D and omega-3s, he is healing. And again, I see the holistic approach working, where the pediatric approach and the mainstream medical approach was to focus on waiting for him to be a surgical candidate.
I don't know what you must be thinking right now. You've got the vaccine injury, antibiotic injury. I mean, we hear this the whole time, so many injuries from the tiny drugs or big drugs or whatever it may be. It's non-stop big pharma injury. So are you just done with all of this unless it's an emergency?
Yes, and it's so hard to know, because part of me wants to believe that there's pieces of the medical industry that are still good. I see that there is potential in our army-based medicine. I see there's potential in how we treat broken bones and car accident victims and amputations and gunshot wounds. We're good at those things. We save lives. But where does that line end? And the spurring of the chronic conditions and the worsening of our health happen? Where is the line? And I struggle to find that line. And I just want to gain more knowledge and learn more, because I have found the answers to heal my body. I've taken my power back. I said no to the pharmaceutical industry, and I changed exactly what Zen was talking about. I've changed my cleaning products, my laundry detergent and my dish soap and my hand soap and my beauty products. And I don't wear makeup because I don't want to have to bother with finding the non-toxic forms of it. I've got a water filter and an air filter. I work on my exercise. I care very deeply about what I put into my body. I have done those things. I have found the right supplements and the right programs to help with my mental and physical health. And the programs that have worked for me might not work for everyone, because everyone's path is different and everyone's condition and need to find their correct environment to let their body heal is different. But there is power in holistic. There is power in making these changes and finding health. But again, I don't know where the line is, and I just want to gain more knowledge until I find it.
Stephanie, isn't it sort of bizarre, but also in a way kind of sort of interesting that you had to have your injury to save your child. My son had to have his injury to save the grandchildren. It's in a way, I'm grateful to you, first of all, for speaking out, and the fact that you had the injury, because you may have gone on and taken the COVID shot and given the COVID shot to your son or anything like that. But it's sad that it has to be an injury for us to wake up.
I agree. And it's sad because I see it all around me. I see myself being injured. I have a dear friend from nursing school who was injured by the COVID vaccine, and that caused her to wake up, and now her kids are unvaccinated. And I see so many moms who, I have this dear friend, and her first son is vaccine injured, and it woke her up to the harms of vaccines. And the medical industry is hurting us. These vaccines are hurting us. And it is so sad that we have to experience these injuries for ourselves to wake up, to see the truth that is behind all of these lies and these propaganda and this system that is so corrupt and run by money and monetary and the desire for more power and control. I wish so badly that God would have his truth be known, because I see the truth. I see him unfolding it to me, and I just wish more people saw it without needing to experience the pain and the suffering I and so many around me have experienced.
Stephanie, you're an amazing human being. I'm sorry this happened to you. I'm thrilled for your child. And I'm again, all the viewers will be saying the same thing. Just grateful for you speaking up and speaking out. And I hope more people come forward like you to do this. Thank you for being here this morning and for speaking so honestly.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I am so grateful that I've learned about your guys' TV channel and these programs. Listening to Zen, it's given me some resources to go out and look and find a way to support on a bigger level than I was aware of before. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Stephanie, and Godspeed as you go forward with everything that you are doing.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.